Is the man at the center of OneBC Party's implosion now trying to drive a wedge inside of Rebel News? I'm Drea Humphrey, and you're not going to want to miss a minute of this very strange story. As many of you know, OneBC is the breakaway party formed by former BC Conservative MLAs Dallas Brodie and Tara Armstrong, and it recently imploded. Staff were fired and rehired, board members, well, 3 of them turned on Brodie and abruptly ousted her as leader. And then after a very public struggle, Dallas regained control of the party, with Armstrong seemingly no longer serving by her side. Brodie's former chief of staff, Tim Thielman, and then executive director, Paul Rashford, have since announced they've resigned, and Othman Mekhloufi, the communications figure at the center of the story, you may have thought retreated back to wherever the heck he was before so many knew his name. Instead, he's become a thorn at my journalistic side and what has hands down been the most bizarre media inquiry exchanges I've ever endured. I'm going to do my best to walk you through some of those so that you can better understand why I believe some of the statements he's given me with the request to redact and amend my previous report have been handed to me in bad faith with the intent to manipulate public opinion and record. Let me explain. According to what the 22 or 23-year-old claims is a statement from an anonymous spokesperson at his political consultancy firm, a firm he would not tell me the name of when I asked, I've compromised journalism and Rebel News. Via my report on the party split, Othman wants me to tell you that Rebel News has cited radical left-wing sources to further spread a defamatory hoax against a fellow conservative operative, aka him. The statement then accuses me of recycling testimony from far-left groups, stripping away its context to amplify anti-conservative messages from Antifa. Othman's firm also wants me to tell you that all of this is because of my devotion to MLA Dallas Brodie, and that I have lost all credibility within the conservative movement. I guess there goes my Rebel News Viewer Choice of the Year award now, doesn't it? But was any of that true? Am I loyal to a politician over the public? Was I ignoring context to defame poor little Othman because he's conservative and I've suddenly become an Antifa cheerleader? Of course not. The opposite is true, and unlike Othman, I can prove so. Many of you watched my report on the OneBC split. It wasn't a pre-written hit piece, as his firm's statement falsely claims. It was a sit-down interview with party leader Dallas Brodie, a direct source to the story who was not given questions in advance. According to Brodie, the genesis moment behind the party fallout was her wanting Othman Mekhloufi fired on multiple occasions, and the pushback she claims she received from Thielman and Rashford when she tried to do so. Othman's spokesperson's statement claims, however, that Brodie never took issue with him until she was removed as leader. But that claim isn't even aligning with what Thielman, who was once in charge of the staff, says. He says that Brodie did raise concerns about Othman and asked for him to be fired while she was still party leader. So right out the gate, Othman wants me to correct my report with his statements that don't align with the public record. But it gets much worse than that. The statement he sent me also claims that Brodie referred to him as a racist for supporting immigration restrictions. That simply didn't happen. The word racist never came out of her mouth, and during the interview, she herself acknowledged that mass immigration was a serious issue and that she supported working towards certain restrictions to it, in particular decreasing it, even though it's largely a federal issue. What she did say, however, was that she was not comfortable with an aggressive focus on remigration within the party and the way she believes it was being pushed.
Frankly, I'm right where I wanted to be, and I felt like I was being pulled into a direction that I didn't like, and I put my foot down. And I think at a deeper level, that's what this was really about. And so I don't want to talk endlessly about things like get involved in this discussion about remigration, because the remigration philosophy means that unless you're basically white European, you don't belong in Canada. And then that is absolutely ridiculous, because many ancestries and ethnicities built this country. We know that. Even the Canadian National Railway had, Chinese workers, and everybody worked on it. And so I don't see Canada that way. I'm not a huge fan of sort of forced multiculturalism, but I'm also not saying that you can't say that the country is. I don't want to be. That's not my policy. It's not my philosophy.
Now, remigration itself isn't a dirty word. It refers to one returning to a previous country of residence. And for most, the growing calls for remigration means calling for the removal of individuals who are illegally in a country. And that's a growing request due to a real consequence from countries facing mass immigration problems like Canada. It's an issue that we at Rebel News, including our founder Ezra Levant, are not afraid of reporting on or shedding light on.
The U.S. president has several times used the word remigration, and that word is used a little bit in Scandinavia. There are some countries that pay migrants to go home. I saw the United Nations the other day say that 1 million Syrian migrants have moved back, Syrian refugees, because the war is over. The sanctions are gone, so you have 1 million Syrians that have gone home. They're expecting another million. Is it time for Canada to say, okay, not only are we going to stop inward migration, but we're going to get these folks who no longer have the right to be here out? That word remigration, I've seen it used in the States. They're talking about it in the UK. Do you think that perhaps it's time that Canada say to those who have overstayed, time to go home?
Well, the first step is making sure that you're not bringing people here who don't have a job to come to. So I think that's one part of it. But anyone who doesn't have a job, doesn't have prospects, absolutely. Why would they stay?
But like with many terms today, a small but sometimes loud amount of people hijack words to mean something beyond their meanings. And to them, remigration, from both the left and right, they're claiming it means race or religious-based deportations. An interpretation Brodie appears to have taken notice of when she described her concerns with not wanting to focus on it in the party. That's Brodie's story, not mine, not Ezra Levant's, because the interview wasn't about Rebel News journalists and what they think. Yet Othman's firm drags an unrelated interview from Ezra about remigration and calls it an endorsement, as if to suggest that if my boss held a different view than Brodie's, and perhaps Othman's, then somehow I'm journalistically in the wrong for reporting on her statements. Sorry, Othman. At Rebel News, we don't edit interviews to fit our narrative. That's the mainstream media style, and I'm surprised, since you worked in communications, you can't see that. And speaking of controlling the narrative, wait until you see the lengths Othman took to try and shape my report for you. You see, the statement Othman sent me to demand changes to my report avoids responding to the central reason Dallas Brodie gave for wanting him to be gone. During that same interview, Brodie referenced discovering this blog of Othman. She said that what concerned her about the blog was his ex-posts that are embedded within it, and she felt that what was written in them were just inappropriate for someone working with her party, and she simply wasn't going to be defending them. Now, Othman wants you to believe that I blindly relied on this blog to push some pro-Brodie hoax against him. Yet, in the report after Brodie mentions the blog, I told viewers that the blog appears to be far left, and I question its credibility since it's written by an anonymous author. You know, kind of like how Othman is giving me statements from an anonymous spokesperson. But those statements don't actually acknowledge any of this, do they? In fact, Othman, more than anyone, knows the lengths I took to offer him fair opportunity to comment in that report. And he knows that I didn't even waste time, the public's time, with some of the controversial yet unsubstantiated claims against him. Claims that, if I had mentioned, would have made him look even more shady than he already did on his own by hiding his identity with a face mask and sunglasses when he was seen in public with the party. In fact, while Othman wants me to claim I relied on left-wing info to defame him, the truth is I anticipated that that blog would be brought up in the interview due to its circulating online by people, including Global News' Jazz Johal, when he suggested his followers read it to look into him. I gave Othman every chance possible to not let the leftists speak for him and for him to speak up. Before interviewing Brodie, I reached out to MLA Tara Armstrong, Tim Thielman, and Othman. I invited all three of them to be interviewed so you could hear their side of the story. But all key players except for Brodie declined. I didn't stop there with Othman, though. I sent him the blog in advance. I asked him to confirm whether the posts within it are attributed to him, and I told him plainly that the easiest way to clear his name of anything in that blog would be for him to speak up in the report. He declined. So I sent him a list of straightforward questions to get ahead of such claims in case they're raised in my interview. I asked whether he was employed or contracted by the party, if he had rebuttals to what Brodie had been saying on a line or what that blog was saying about him. And I even assured him that I would not be repeating claims from people online that he, an Arab who refers to himself as a heritage American, is some sort of neo-Nazi, as such words shouldn't be thrown around so lightly. And I didn't. Heck, I even told Thielman, who was still handling the party's media at that time, how annoying it was for me to have to sit through a Rachel Gilmore show to hear audio of Othman discussing remigration when they should have just simply arranged for me to interview Othman about that instead.
You know, his success in trying to share that agenda politically.
I've seen a little bit of disappointing things from the Politico side because I know that some of these guys are playing rhetorical obfuscation. A lot of them agree with us. For example, this morning I spoke to a really senior advisor to Pierre Poilievre, and he said that it took him all hell's work to convince Pierre to finally take up anti-immigration stances, and that's happening. You'll notice that the CPC caucus, members of parliament today, have begun posting, I think even yesterday, began posting anti-immigration rhetoric because they've finally gotten permission to.
Instead, both Tim and Othman just pointed me to this statement. It only briefly discusses Othman as a junior staffer. It certainly avoids talking about his ex-posts, and it focuses heavily on Brodie's character, which it implies is mentally unstable. Another claim I didn't focus on too much. I read from the statement and I embedded it in full in my article, but just like with the Othman's a Nazi claims that I don't have evidence for, I don't have evidence that Brodie is mentally unfit, and she certainly didn't seem so when I interviewed her, despite everything she was going through. But perhaps the most prominent example of how thorough and fair my work has been on this file to Othman is what took place after I interviewed Brodie. I reached out to Tim and Othman again since Brodie brought up the blog, just as I had warned she probably would, to offer them opportunity for me to redo the end of my report to incorporate any new statements they thought was necessary for Othman's voice to be heard. Does this sound like the work of a biased journalist set out to defame him, as his spokesperson claims? So the real question becomes, why did Othman allow leftist voices to speak for him anyways? And why did he, in a very calculating manner, wait until I published the report that he refused to speak to then come to me with a list of amendments that he wanted me to report on, which his background in communication should, of course, mean he knows that's not how it works. He says, now that I've seen your report, I'm able to comment on it because I can actually see what the contents are. There are 3 things I would like added to the text of your article. And pay attention to this. He says, the video doesn't matter to me. I'll tell you why that's important in a minute. First, Othman suddenly claims that I erred by referring to him as a staffer, even though the very first question that remained unanswered from him was for him to clarify whether he was contracted or an employee. And the statement him and Tim referred to him as a junior staffer. He chooses now to say that he was contracted through his firm and instructs me to change my written article, which called him a communications figure, which is still accurate, by the way, to a communications contractor. Then comes the anonymous spokesperson to his rescue again, who Othman tells me wants to quote something about Dallas Brodie. And of course, he goes hard on her and makes her sound crazy again. The anonymous spokesperson says that Brodie is using Othman as a scapegoat for her so-called unstable behavior. And then he tells me I need to include statements from Tim Tillman praising him on X. Look how kind Othman is here. He tells me he's written the words out for me because according to him, my report, the one that he and Tim refused to be interviewed for, isn't balanced without Tim's flattering perspective of him on social media. And then he quotes himself being kind of nice to Brodie, wishing her the best. But the narcissistic icing on the cake, and I'm not saying he's a narcissist, is when Othman texts me this. He tells me that since I'm using photos, he wants me to use what looks to me like an AI touched photo of him staring off into the window with a gaze. I kid you not. Don't worry, Othman, we got your back. Rebel made you a holiday version. In fact, those watching can make it into a Christmas or New Year's postcard for next year. The nerve. I could go on. There was so much to say here, including him texting me at 12:30 a.m. to ask if I could have an off-record call at that moment. Bizarre, right? Almost as bizarre as the X post attributed to Othman's account. You know, the ones he's been avoiding answering to like a plague, and also on the account that he privatized very quickly during the split. But don't worry, I have a few of those to share with you thanks to that far left blog that Brodie and others keep mentioning. And yes, of course, I reached out to Othman again to give him another opportunity to speak to this before this report. Exhibit A, Othman's wife is apparently taking issue with him sharing certain materials with his kids. It reads, "My wife found the copy of BAM I gave my son. It's over." He then shares what appears to be a text exchange from this so-called wife asking why he gave Bronze Age Mindset, a book, to their kid. And he responds by saying it's a self-help book, and then replies to his own post with another tweet saying this isn't the first time, showing an older tweet from October where he says, "My wife caught me. What do I do?" And she had apparently texted him asking whether or not he's sending the children white girl Sonorad real TikTok. It's very weird, except I don't think Othman has a wife and kids. Everyone I spoke to who knows him says he doesn't. And when I directly asked him whether he had a wife or child, he refused to answer that as well. He's also in his early 20s, so even if he did have kids, how exactly would they be reading BAM, the Bronze Age Mindset, a philosophical manifesto written by an anonymous figure called Bronze Age Pervert? But Sonorad, which he also referred to, is an ancient sun wheel symbol, historically, yes, but in more modern history, more recent times, it's also been repurposed by some and documented by researchers as a symbol frequently used by Nazis and neo-Nazis and extremists. It just is. So what the heck is going on here? Is Othman lying to the public about having a wife and kids? Is he doing some sort of online role play? Is he delusional? Or is he just speaking in coded subculture language that he knows most people won't recognize? And to better understand this, since Othman won't speak to any of these posts himself, I went down some rabbit holes that I genuinely didn't like being in, into corners of the internet tied to actual far-right and neo-pagan subcultures where people sometimes do role play. And it seems sometimes they sincerely believe they belong to some modern Hyperborean elite race. To be clear, Hyperborea appears metaphorically in philosophy and mythology and even in Nietzsche's writings. So it's hard to say exactly or guess where Othman fits in on the large spectrum of what any of this could all mean. And I am certainly not pretending to be an authority on the matter. But what I can say is my opinion of what Othman is doing based on the rabbit holes I went through too, is that he is role playing and perhaps counting on the fact that most people won't understand the references he's doing, and that if challenged, he can simply brush them off as just a joke. But is a junior staffer or contractor in charge of a party's communications, in other words, their voice, publicly discussing high-quality violence really a joke? Because that's what Othman appears to be doing in this post, which says that leftism is anti-civilizational and adds that there are necessities in culture for high-quality violence. Or what about this post here where he seems to be rating 20-year-olds or making up that he's rating 20-year-olds who he claims were talking about Israel with quotation marks and the Jewish question with quotation marks. This is all totally not very normal. You tell me in the comments what I even just talked about. But I want to know if you see a pattern here. When I asked Othman directly about his post, he hid behind an unnamed spokesperson and shifted the focus to branding Dallas as unstable. When I pushed harder about those same posts for his report, that's when he hit me with this statement you're seeing here, where he attacked my professionalism, my journalism with bogus, unproven, now disproven claims, where I show you I was completely professional and I gave him every opportunity to have his own voice, which he rejected and then tried to manipulate me and how I wrote about him with after. I didn't defame him. He would lose in court so bad to throw this out. And did you notice when I pointed out that he waited till the end? Again, someone in a background of communications waits till I get the report out and then tells me he doesn't care what I said in the video. He just wants the written record change. And that's because he knows that whether it's a lie or not, if it's searchable and reshareable, it can still stick. He literally wanted me to quote his, I don't know if it's a role play spokesperson or an anonymous spokesperson or him. I don't know. He wanted me to quote that in writing about myself, telling people that I'm defaming, that I'm disingenuous, that my journalism isn't up to standard. It's kind of sick and twisted. But I'm not a politician for him to manipulate. I'm Drea Humphrey with Rebel News. I saw right through it. Hence, doing this video report. And your spokespersons claim, Othman, that I am the one who's gone ahead and lost all the respect of the conservative community. I think that that concern really is all yours. Drea Humphrey with Rebel News. At Rebel News, we don't back down from bringing the other side of story. Sometimes it gets messy like this, but we stick to the facts and we follow them where they lead us. If you appreciate the work that we do on the BC political file, please consider donating to keep my reports alive at bcleadershipreports.ca.